Thank you all for joining us here at Blandy Experimental Farm, the State Arboretum of Virginia, for the first lecture in our Blandy at 100 series. So today we'll be kicking off our kind of centennial retrospective. I will let Ariel do the official introduction, so I'll just do some quick housekeeping notes. As all of you here in person know, we have some refreshments in the back. Please help yourselves throughout the afternoon. We are also streaming live to Blandy's YouTube page. I want to do a special thank you to our friends in Clarke County and to Virginia Humanities. Together with the foundation of the State Arboretum, we secured a grant which helped to underwrite some of the costs for this program series, including the edible materials and the digital materials. So we're very grateful. My name is Anne-Marie Curialason. I'm the director of the foundation of the State Arboretum. I was telling one of our attendees today that I'm one of the inside cats here at the Arboretum, so I work indoors mainly at the desk, so it's very exciting and gratifying to be able to share this program with you all today. The foundation is a very small nonprofit which helps to support all of the initiatives here at Blandy. As we approach our 100th anniversary, I hope you all think and reflect about what Blandy means to you and what Blandy means for our community. Every donation made to the foundation helps to support the mission directly. So when you donate, you're not purchasing light bulbs or toilet paper, you're helping produce public programs like these, you're helping to bring undergraduate and graduate researchers to Blandy, and you're helping to make sure that environmental sciences, study, research, and community continues here for another 100 years. So thank you all for being here today and supporting that important work. And I would be completely remiss if I didn't invite some mandatory audience participation. I see Bill looking at me very concerned. If I can pick on you all, please raise your hand if you are a current or former board member of the foundation. I know there are a number of us here. Thank you all for your service, your help, your volunteerism. Now raise your hand if you might be a former Blandy employee and or a spouse of a board member or employee. Volunteerism is included, I think, in that position as well. So thank you all for being with us here today. And without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Ariel Firebaugh, the Director of Scientific Engagement, to give us more context to today's program. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I've got some notes because it's a very official, formal occasion. So welcome, everybody. It's so wonderful to see a big crowd here for this program. This is a really good day. We're here to celebrate a birthday. Blandy turns 100 this year. Actually, we're celebrating the centennial over the next 2 or so years because we just have so many wonderful ideas about what to do, why limit ourselves. But over the past century, generations of students and scientists have really come into their own here at Blandy, living and learning alongside one another at this sleepy little field station tucked away in the foothills of the Blue Ridge. And I'm one of those students. I spent a summer here as an undergraduate research student studying moths, and then I came back as a graduate student to study fireflies. I just feel so lucky that my time here at Blandy overlaps with this centennial milestone, and I'm honored to be able to help capture some of the stories about this place with this series of centennial programs that we'll be doing this year. So as Anne-Marie mentioned, this is the first program in a series of 6 that we'll be running this spring and fall, We're taking a break during the summer because it gets too hot here in the library. Today's program will focus on the early days of Blandy as a field research station. How did 700 or so acres of pasture, orchards, and row crops 100 miles north of Charlottesville end up as the University of Virginia Field Research Station? What would life have been like here in those days? And how has the landscape and community surrounding Blandy impacted what this place would become? The next program in our series, mark your calendars now, is Sunday, April 19th. It's called Unruly, When Nature Goes Wild and Doesn't Fit in a Box. And this program will be all about those times when nature refuses to be as neat and tidy as scientists would like it to be. So Ty Ralston, curator, will be speaking about the Arboretum's collections. I'll be speaking about ginkgos, the quirkiest of trees, and former Blandy graduate student Claire Rodenberg will be talking about a time when her research project just refused to cooperate. So I'm really looking forward to that one. And the plan is to live stream that program as well to YouTube. Now, I will introduce our speakers. But before I do that, I'm hearing that our radiators are starting to chatter a little bit. So this is something that you should know. The library is heated by steam radiators, and they like to let us know that they're here from time to time. So if you hear at any point in the program a whooshing noise or a clanking noise that sounds like the ghosts of Christmas past are coming up out of the basement, don't worry, it's just the radiators. Okay, now I'll introduce our speakers after I introduce the radiators. So our first speaker is Maral Kalbian. She's an architectural historian and historic preservation specialist who has spent nearly 40 years exploring, researching, and documenting the historic architecture of Virginia's Shenandoah Valley and Piedmont. Over the course of her career, Maral has completed more than 50 historic district nominations and 40 individual property nominations to the National Register of Historic Places. And one of her earliest projects was the nomination of the Blandy Experimental Farm Historic District in 1992. Maral has authored several books that explore regional history through its architecture, as well as a number of walking and driving tours that encourage others to discover the area's historic landscapes. She lives and works in Clarke County and holds master's degrees in architectural history and historic preservation from the University of Virginia. Maral, thanks so much for lending your time and expertise to the program today. I'm going to introduce Dave, and then you're okay. Dave Carr is a research professor of environmental sciences. He arrived at Blandy in 1997, serving as the curator of the State Arboretum of Virginia in 2009. Since then, he has served as director of the Blandy Experimental Farm. His research focuses on plant-insect interactions, including the role of floral scent in attracting pollinators. He has been an avid birder for nearly 50 years and leads regular bird tours at Blandy. Dave, thanks so much for giving up your Sunday to be here. I know you'd rather be birding, but maybe you'll catch something interesting later. So with that, I'm going to hand the baton over to our first speaker, Maral. Take it away. I'm so excited to learn from you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's great to see so many people here, some familiar faces and others who I don't know, which is always a good thing. I was thrilled when I was asked to speak, especially the first talk of the Centennial Celebration, because I really feel that visitors today, they're so often struck by the beauty here at Blandy in the natural world and the landscape that very often the man behind the history and also just the long history of the property are overlooked. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time telling you about, the place, the history of the place, the person, and persons actually, and just the past in general. So we're going to, right on cue, the past. That's interesting. Anyway, and I'm going to start I just want to say that I'm going to focus initially on settlement in this area by Europeans, not Native American history. There's a huge history here that has been addressed somewhat by other people. There's a cultural landscape management plan that's currently being written. It's almost completed, that addresses that. But remember that there's a long history with that too. Another thing I'm really not going to focus on is the distinct topography that's here, which has really affected the way the property is developed. And maybe Dave will talk more about that. So these are the things that you should know as you walk around Blandy, and I think it'll make you appreciate it more. One is that the land itself was part of Lord Fairfax's Northern Neck Proprietary. And this is a map that was done in 1747, updated in 1755, and here we have, you are here right now. And then that's a modern overlay of where Clarke County fits into that. So this British peer had 5 million acres of land, and he was starting to settle it, giving grants to people, selling grants. And at the same time, the new government of Virginia was doing the same thing, and very often they would grant land to people in the same place. So that there was huge lawsuits that fell within that, but we are in the Northern Neck Proprietary. And this is a really interesting map because Lord Fairfax, who lived in England, he had Robert Carter was his land agent, and Robert Carter granted himself and his children and grandchildren 50,000 acres of Lord Fairfax's grant. And that was done in 1730, and he dies in 1732. And that's what a large part of southern Clarke County encompasses, was his grant, and also part of Warren County. So this is where Blandy is now. But I find this map very interesting because it also shows these dotted lines are all the old roads. So you have Route 50, you have Route 7. It says down here, Ashby's Bent. A bent is Old English for a grassy area. It can also mean a peak. And then there's Greenway Court, where it all happened. That's where Lord Fairfax moved his land office in 1761. So if you wanted to pay rent, for a piece of land or get a grant for a piece of land, you would come to White Post, to Greenway Court. And then here's Winchester, and this funny little thing up there with the 4 arms, that is Fort Loudon, which part of it still sort of exists. But anyway, that's where we are. It was part of Robert King Carter's grant. What happens is Carter dies in 1732, and the land is passed on and eventually gets to his great-grandson, Nathaniel Burrell. And Burrell sold land in 1771 to, anyway. It eventually, in 1791, went from Norton to Henderson to Mr. Tooley, who then bought it in 1805. So we're here again, and this was the land that Nathaniel Burrell had. He partitioned it off in different pieces. This eventually would become Blandy. So Joseph Tooley Sr. was a tanner who lived in Millwood, just below the Burrell Morgan Mill. He leased land from Nathaniel Burrell and had a huge tannery there, and made a lot of money from that. Had several other tanneries, one in Front Royal, one in what became West Virginia, and he was a fairly wealthy man. But then he bought this land that was adjacent, and he farmed the property, and of course he used enslaved labor. So he is living both in Millwood, and we think he might have lived here. I'll get to that later. There's a building remnant that might belong to him, to his house. But Tooley dies, and so does his wife. And he was very wealthy when he died, and his son inherited the property, Joseph Tooley Jr. And in 1835, Tooley marries a widow with 3 children, and one of the first things he does here is build the Tuileries. And I know you all have heard the stories. The Tuileries, he called it the Tuileries. It was like a pun on the Tuileries in Paris. And even though he made all his money as a tanner, or his father had made money as a tanner, they were thinking of calling it also Hyde Park, which there is. So we think the quarters, which is the earliest portion of the building that we're in, the other side of this U, was built in the early 1830s. Because again, he had so many slaves, field slaves. They were working primarily in agriculture. Some worked in the tannery also, under industry. And when people came, you can imagine when this house was built, it just blew people away, because it was unlike anything else that was here at the time. Very high style, with this unusual cupola. And then the landscape was so amazing. And people, this is from a letter someone had written when they had visited here, and they talked about just the miles and miles of stone fencing, which is still a big character-defining feature here today. There they are. That's Mr. Tooley Jr. I don't have a picture of Senior, but this was painted by Jane Stewart, who was the daughter, of Gilbert Stewart, because Tooley Jr. had bought a painting of George Washington from Gilbert Stewart. And then there's his lovely bride. And they lived here, and these are the number of slaves held by Joseph Tooley in 1830. He had 55, and then 73 by 1840. Now, as an architectural historian, this building is very significant as far as studying slave quarters, because it's a barracks-type slave quarter, and there are not very many of these throughout Virginia. In fact, there's been a study that's been ongoing for 5 years documenting all the slave quarters in Virginia, and this is like one of maybe only 4 or 5. Now, I think there's another one that used to exist in Clarke County at Clifton. This is a picture taken in the late 19th century. You see the women there visiting, and then there's a close-up. You see a small child, but it has multiple doors. It's 2 stories, not as grand as what we have here at Blandy, but certainly of that same vein. And unlike the Blandy quarters, there has been remodeling obviously done here, but this has been completely remodeled. And we have someone here who lived in it. But anyway, so mostly what you have, there's preservation bias, because the slave quarters, other kinds of outbuildings, chicken coops, corn cribs, outhouses, they don't survive because people don't use them anymore. But so in looking at what we have, the majority of the slave quarters that survive in Clarke County, because Clarke County had a huge population of enslaved people. More than half of the people that lived in Clarke County at the beginning of the Civil War were African American, enslaved African American. There was a very small population of free blacks. But this is the 1823 log quarters at Claremont that has been recently restored, thanks to some federal grant money, so thank you, federal government. But this is what you usually have. You have smaller buildings, very often combined. This one is brick, but it is a summer kitchen and a slave quarter upstairs. This is a rare view of Anfield, where it was a huge plantation. this is interesting because it shows the arrangement. This was housing for field slaves. So we don't know what else was here other than this, but at Blandy, but it's a really significant building. Okay, moving into through the 19th century. This farm was just really one of the highest yielding farms in the area, with wheat as the primary cash crop. There were several articles in these farming journals that talked about how Mr. Tooley was so innovative, experimental, if you will, even back then. So he was very much revered as a farmer, so he dies quite suddenly, right at the brink of the Civil War. And he doesn't have a will. So his poor wife, Mary, ends up going through lawsuit after lawsuit, trying to sell her interests to several cousins. She gets paid in Confederate money, which then, of course, is worthless. She finally moves to Winchester, but what it did is it created a record, thank you, of what the Tuileries was like, because it described the property, because they tried to auction it off several times. The sale went through, and then creditors came. It was nullified. So there's a lot of information about the number of enslaved persons, and then also, they call this the quarters. So I think someone had asked me once, well, maybe this was some other building, but I think everyone, historians agree that that was, in fact, a slave quarter. So eventually it gets to Belinda, and who marries a man named Upton Boyce, who was a lawyer initially from St. Louis. His father had moved here. They lived in Winchester, and she was, a cousin, a great niece, actually, of Tooley. So they end up buying the property. And it took, again, they bought it, then creditors said, no, this is null and void because of Mary, and it was just really hard. But what happens with Upton Boyce, he was involved in the railroad, Shenandoah Valley Railroad. He was a lawyer, but he was also very interested in farming. And he continued farming, and he established orchards on the property. And let's see here. There he is. I noticed something's with his eye. I don't know if anyone knows about that. But anyway, like I said, he was originally from St. Louis. That's his wife, Belinda, next to them. And apparently they were quite the party people and would have fabulous parties at the Tuileries. And even after the Panic of 1873 and then another downturn, that did not deter them from having a good time. And he was, the Shenandoah Valley Railroad, it almost went bankrupt, and he was responsible really for getting it, he was the vice president, getting it to come through the path that it has now. Initially it was supposed to go through Millwood, because Millwood was a commercial center. Boyce didn't exist. And when the railroad went through at the junction of the road to Winchester from Route 50, from the crossing of the river, and the railroad, that became the town of Boyce, first known as Boyceville. So he was, very astute and all that. This is a photograph. North is to your right, that shows, this was done in 1905, which is about the time that then it sold to Mr. Blandy. You can see there the quarters. That's the old stable, which is the director's house. And there's a reservoir for water, and then all these orchards that were here. So there were orchards basically where we're sitting. So this is Mr. Blandy, and he purchased the property, there's another picture of him there, in 1905. And He was born in New York City and educated apparently in New York, France, and Switzerland. I tried to find where he went to college. I don't think he did. He went to the Germantown Academy, which was a prep school, graduating there in 1885. His father, he followed in his father's footsteps, became a member of the New York Stock Exchange. Supposedly he was related to the Carnegies, and he traveled extensively, spoke several languages, went to Europe quite often, was a member of the Brooklyn Borough School Board, which will be significant later, and a member of the Union League. And he was just a, typical wealthy, I don't want to use the word dilettante, but he was into a lot of different things. And I don't know if how well he mastered any one thing, but he came down here, as did many wealthy people from the north, and bought up these farms that were plagued by financial problems, like we saw with Mary Tooley. After the Civil War, things just were really hard. I did this close-up because I thought it was interesting. This hat is interesting. I'll bring that up later. And then I think that's a cigarette, which that's really, he needs to flick the ash for sure. Anyway, he's just, yeah. So in 1903, he purchased the Tooleries, but then he purchased, well, one thing I didn't say is when the Blandys had it, it got divided into several portions. And Blandy's great goal was to bring it all back, reconsolidate it. So he did, and the farm came to 912 acres. And he becomes very interested in the stock farm that he establishes here. He buys an entire herd of cattle from the people at Rosemont in Berryville, Mr. Clarke, who was from Pittsburgh. And then in 1908, he marries Georgette Borland, and she was much younger than he. And during this time, he supported the local schools. He gave money to build 2 African-American schools in Clarke County, one in Millwood and one in White Post. Both buildings are still there. One is a community center in Millwood, the other is a private residence. I think that's because maybe he had been on the school board in New York and was interested in that. He also started a canning club. He had competitions for young men to see who could grow the most amount of corn on their farm. For women, it would be who could have the largest flock of turkeys. So he was really into, developing an interest in farming in young people too. I found this really interesting. He endows this hospital bed in Winchester in memory of his mother. And it was to be used by people in Clarke County who could not afford paying their hospital bill. And it was to be in perpetuity. So someone needs to see if that's still in existence. But, again, he was just, he really helped the community. People admired him. There are descriptions in the newspaper about all these great parties that would happen at his house. So he dies in 1926, and it's kind of a sudden death. And lo and behold, he bequeaths part of his estate to the University of Virginia. He ends up, and it says for agricultural education of boys, and I think Dave's going to get into this more. He ends up being buried in Delaware with his parents. So we have the establishment of the arboretum, and I put that in there. I'm just trying to be chronological here. In 1939, his wife Georgette, who got 210 acres of his 912-acre estate, she dies. So that's how we got to 712 acres for Blandy. He didn't say in his will, I'm leaving 712 acres to the University of Virginia. He said, I'm leaving my estate, and then my wife is going to have the 210 acres with the house, and then money, and then eventually when she dies, that money was going to go to also to the University of Virginia. So she gets remarried to Mr. Bull, and they're both buried at Old Chapel. So with the money that then became available to the university, they built this addition. Part we're in here, and then the archway that you walk into now. And then again in 1986 it was designated as a state arboretum, and then I was 4 years out of grad school when I did the National Register nomination. It needs updating. Anyway, so Ariel had mentioned, what was life like in Clarke County at that period. So fortunately, there is an economic and social survey of Clarke County that was done in 1925 by the University of Virginia. They did this for all the counties in Virginia, and it's really interesting. It's like a thick pamphlet, but they use comparative ratios about all sorts of things. So Clarke County back then had about 7,000 citizens. We now have 15,598, maybe more on any given day. So the historical peak before that had been in 1890, and people were leaving. Primarily African Americans were leaving the area in search of better jobs. So that's sort of why it had done that. The racial composition, we had come down from our peak of 60 African American and 40 white. It was 75% white, 24.3 black, and then 0.6 foreign born, which I figured out the thing that would be 222 foreign born people. And which also interests me. Who were these people? And I can think of Mr. Bevans, who started the Blue Ridge Hunt. He was British, but I'm really intrigued by who these people were. Anyway, we had a fairly low illiteracy rate, and then the economy, primarily agriculture. In the report, they talked about how there's a very limited industry. They talked about how many of the farms were mortgaged, and this migration trend of Northerners and Midwesterners coming in to buy land was happening here in Clarke County. We have Clarke County's history. If you look to see who entered into Clarke County, the different families that came in the late 19th and early 20th century, some of the wealthiest families, the Gilpins, for example, the McKay Smiths, they came into this area from places west and north. So there was this big trend, and you see it a lot over the mountain in hunt country. A lot of, like the Orange County Hunt is actually named after Orange County, New York Hunt, which moved down here. So the thing is, why did he give it to UVA and not VPI? I mean, I think that is a burning question, and that's why in my title slide I had put that is this a folly? It's like, what was he thinking? And I tried to do a little investigation. So he published these letters in the Winchester paper and also in the Clark Courier, and then other newspapers throughout the Commonwealth, complaining about his treatment at the Virginia State Fair, both in 1906, and then he took a break from it, and then 1911. And he's like, don't even bother with them, they're so incompetent. He had taken his, I told you he had a very successful stock farm, and he took his animals down there, and he had been promised they would be at, center stage. Well, guess what? They had a circus there instead, and they put him in the back, and it rained, and the cows got their feet wet, and it was just, I mean, he goes on and on about this. He was not pleased. So I think that was, you know, strike number one, because it was affiliated with Virginia Tech. And then in 1912, he has this very public debate with H.E. Boyer, who was the county's first agricultural agent. Again, would have been affiliated with Virginia Tech. And they, oh gosh, they fight about demonstration farming versus just letting farmers do what they've always done. And this was, you know, a debate that was going on all around the country, but they just, these letters, and I mean, you can find them in the Clarke Courier, or if you want, I'll send them to you, because I transcribed them. They're just, you know, they take really low swipes at each other. But again, again, dispute, and they, you know, they use classical references and whatever. It's really very well written. Anyway, so then, you know, Boyer, really low blow. He criticizes Wall Street, and you know, Blandy had been a member of the New York Stock Exchange, and he's like, you know, this whole panic of 1907, the only people who made money were the wealthy people associated with Wall Street, meaning you, Mr. Blandy. And so then another guy joins in. You think it's over, and 10 years later, there's, I found this article by L.J. McCartney, who was the agent for the Farmers Union of Frederick County. And boy, he rallies against the wealthy and Wall Street types also. So again, I think Blandy was just like, tired of this. And then there's the story that appears in one of the histories written in the 70s, I guess, about the reason was, you know, VPI was advocating cutting down cedar trees because there's the cedar rust that would jump to the apple trees and decimate the apple trees population. And people were doing that all throughout. That was a suggestion for farmers. But apparently they wanted him to cut down these cedar trees that, I don't know which ones they are, but were very near and dear to his heart. So I think the man had, you know, had enough. And he left it then to UVA. And the thing is, it was a huge surprise to UVA and the Board of Visitors. They were like, what? And they had, you know, they had to have meetings to say, should we even accept this? Because it was, you know, 70 miles. Is it 70 or 90? 90 miles from Charlottesville. So it's interesting that, you know, he did this. This painting, which you see over there, I think really captures him in the sense that this was painted by not that one. This one was painted by Frederick Remington in 1900 and is entitled Greenhorn Cowboy, which, you know, that of that period, it means someone who doesn't really know what they're doing, sort of like a dilettante. And we don't know, I talked to the gallery, this is down in Louisiana, and they bought it from the descendants of Blandy. They know it was Blandy, but they don't know if Blandy had been out west, you know, like this is that time period when going out west, like Teddy Roosevelt was a big deal, or this was also the time that Remington spent a lot of time in New York. So maybe, I don't know, who knows what was going on. But I think this really captures the spirit of Blandy. He would just try these things and see what sticks, and he did what he wanted to do. That hat reminds me of that hat that he had in his hand with his cigarette. I don't know if it is or not. But this painting that's here was painted by Barbara Bird in 2009, you know, so that Blandy would have a copy here, which I think is really good. Okay, now we're going to take a quick tour of, fortunately, there are these great historic photographs that exist of Blandy when UVA met they finally decided to accept the property. And again, remember, they knew that when the widow died, they would get another influx of cash. So, but here is what the quarters were like, and you can see all of the apple trees that had been removed where we're now standing. So this is, you know, the wing comes out this way, so you don't really see that. And it had, you know, center front door. It was 10 rooms, 5 on each level. So we don't know how many people lived in this building. Probably 2 families per room. Not the greatest living quarters. Architecturally, you know, this is a very elegant building. We call these stepped parapets. That was just an architectural style. A lot of the outbuildings at Blandy have that. And we have several places in Clarke County that use that motif. Up in the northern part of the county, Smithfield, if any of you are aware of that, and Wycliffe Church. And then it's got, look at the beautiful stepped, corbelled brick cornice. I mean, it's like, this was a very, you know, nice building. Anyway, you can see the outline of that portico roof when you go back out. And this is now a window, but it was originally the door. So yeah, here's a then and now. Yeah, you can see it there. I love this photograph from the back because it shows it had a wood shingle roof originally, and you can kind of see in through this is looking out the front door, but you can see these 5 rooms that existed. So these are, again, then and now, and you can see not much has changed. This is changing, this is being repaired, which is great. This was added in 1927, you know, to allow the students and the faculty that were coming here another way of access to the upstairs. So in 1941, the work began. This is after Mrs. Blandy died, Mrs. Bull, and they had already come up with this idea of a U-shaped addition on there, and then, you know, they got, I think it was $697,000 or whatever, and then they had applied for an education improvement grant, so they have the funds to do this. And it's, you know, these pictures are great. Oh, we are here, because, you know, this is before all the landscaping was done. There's Lake Georgette, and, you know, it was painted white, which now, I mean, I don't know if anyone's made the decision whether it should be repainted, I don't know, but it really sort of stands out. This is the director's house. This section was originally a stable. The Blandys had added this brick addition on, and there's a chimney that I think, you know, was on the, and you all know this is by the wildflower garden that Nancy Laird, you know, there's a bench and whatever. But this might have been, you know, an overseer's house, or maybe Tooley Senior's, remnants of part of Tooley Senior's house. Here's the director's house again. This is the addition on the side, and then the classroom was originally a packing shed that would have been built at the time of Boyce, and then that water reservoir, and those appear on those old maps. But, you know, things have changed, but things have also stayed the same, fortunately. This is the, I don't know what you call it, amphitheater? It seems
The
like
terracing.
Terracing, yeah, and it was really terraced, and then you can see it originally had a wooden lattice arbor that went up the side. Now it's, I think, boxwood are there, aren't big boxwood that make a little alley. And then this was the view. This is, I think, later from there, and then Lake Georgette, and that's now, it's kind of a puddle, isn't it? Anyway, and I'm going to, yeah, I wanted to point out, this is again from the 1905 map of Tullery's Farm, and what's interesting is down here it says Old Slaves Burying Ground, and this was the part of the land. Remember, I'd shown you that map originally that had where Thule bought, and then there was one up there, and then the Kriglers lived in the south of that, and that's originally on the Krigler land. And overlay maps were done, and then ground penetrating radar. And if you walk now, it would be east of us. This area has been cordoned off to delineate where they found over 40 burial shafts. So that's a very interesting thing. Oh, I always have to bring her up to speak here. So when I was doing research, back in the 90s, the same year actually that this woman died, I didn't realize that until now. I was looking, they have a very good old photo collection here that is all little envelopes according to subject. And I was, I looked through the buildings, then I saw the flowers, and I like violets, and I opened it, and she fell the test. And I was intrigued by her, and I asked some people in Millwood about her, and found out that she, she was the cook here. It said on the back, Violet Williams Bannister, cook. So I think she was a cook here in the 40s and 50s, and I found out from relatives in Millwood, she used to walk the 4 mile, she'd walk down, because Route 50 wasn't there yet. You walk down the road that takes you past the Millwood Country Club to Millwood. So, and she had 5 children, all of whom died before the age of 10. But she just spoke to me. I don't know, she just seems like a wonderful person. And she was famous apparently for a black cake she'd make with molasses. And then I found this article just in preparation for this in the Courier. Even in her spare time, she was cooking for people, making money, trying to make money for the local church. And for 60 cents, you could get some really good food. I wondered if, where it says the menu will consist of old ham, if that was supposed to be cold ham. But I think it's old ham. I think it's old ham. It means cured ham. Old ham. I don't want to go. Anyway. And then I will end here and hand it over to Dave with Orland White, who was the first director here. So, thank you.
Ariel, I might be
Okay.
He joined us.
The ghosts of Blandy have decided to
There
join
we go.
us.
Morgan's coming in.
Because
This one? Birth of the fiancé?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to pick up the story with the bequest from Graham Blandy to the University of Virginia. And like Maral said, the University of Virginia was not the ag school in the state. And Graham Blandy very clearly felt that the Blandy Experimental Farm should be used to teach boys to learn the arts and sciences of farming. But the university didn't really know if they could accept this gift. And I know from personal experience, hard as it is to believe, that the university will refuse gifts, no matter how generous, if they don't think they can fulfill the wishes of the donor. And so things were sort of tenuous at first. But a professor in the biology department, a parasitologist named Bruce Reynolds, sort of rescued the idea. He was interested in field stations. In fact, he eventually became the director of the Mountain Lake Biological Station, which is another one of UVA's field stations. And he thought there was a way for the university to accept this gift and fulfill Blandy's intentions, Graham Blandy's intentions. So it turns out, fortuitously, Bruce Reynolds in 1918 was in the Army working on airplane engines, and he happened to meet a Harvard-educated geneticist who was working on castor beans, which produce oil, and the oil was being used by the military. And he admired this scientist, got to be friends with this scientist, and stayed in touch with this scientist. In fact, that scientist inspired Reynolds to go on to grad school, get his degree in biology, and he ends up at the University of Virginia. And when he hears about this gift, he remembers, I met this guy, Orland White, years ago, and I think he could pull this off. And so he contacts White. He gets the university interested in inviting him to the university. He gives a lecture at the university, and after the lecture comes up and visits this property to see what he thinks. Can he do something with this? So White has his roots in rural South Dakota. He has a fairly humble childhood, but he's fascinated with academics. He goes to South Dakota State and earns a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and he gets excited about this relatively new field of genetics the papers of Mendel had been recently rediscovered, and the place to go to study genetics in the United States at that time was the Bussey Institution at Harvard. And so White goes to Harvard, learns his genetics with the foremost geneticists of the day, earns his PhD, and then becomes curator of plant breeding and economic plants at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. He becomes part of the Mulford expedition. This is a well-noted expedition to the Amazon to collect plants. It was sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, so ideas not too dissimilar to what we see today. Go find plants, bring them back, and we'll see if we can make a fortune on these plants. And there's Orland White with the other members of the Mulford expedition. The expedition started in Colombia. That's where the headwaters of the Amazon are, but they never made it out of Colombia. They were supposed to go all the way to where the Amazon empties into the Atlantic, but they never made it out of Colombia. But White was a genuine scholar, and he was interested in plant genetics and plant breeding, and he, after visiting the place, thought that there was potential here at the Blandy Experimental Farm, and he agreed to serve as the first director. And so UVA accepted the gift and named White the professor of agriculture and biology. Therefore, more or less, fulfilling Graham Blandy's wishes. There was some contest of whether UVA was fulfilling the intent of the bequest, but local courts here ruled in favor of the university. And so for the last nearly 100 years, we've remained part of the University of Virginia. So this is a photo of the quarters, probably right about the time the university accepted the bequest. And like Maral said, you can see the original roof was wooden shingles. You can see it's overgrown with vines. It was sort of in bad shape. So White spent basically his first little less than a year on the job at the university, working to bring the place up to speed. This is a picture of the quarters now with a raised racing metal roof. I read in the history of Blandy that it was a very cold spring, that first spring, and they were using those wooden shingles as, in the fireplace. But the idea was that the second floor would serve as dorm rooms for the students, and the lower floor would serve as the laboratory for the students. To this day, the upper floor is still used as dormitories for our students here in the summer. And until 2012, those lower floors were used as laboratories here. The other main building on the property was what we now call the Stone Cottage, what the university usually refers to as the director's house. But the person that lived in this house was the farm manager back in the day. So Blandy was originally a farm, as you know, with in Maral's talk, but it continued to serve as a farm throughout much of its early history. Blandy had a farm manager. They had a kitchen garden out here that they would grow food for the faculty and students who stayed here during the summer. You can see where the chimney is, where the native plant trail is nowadays. But those were the two main buildings on the property. But the next big step was to start to build a research program. And White had very little money, but he got the university to help pony up money to begin offering fellowships. And they had originally the idea of 5 fellowships. 2 for $1,000 and 3 for $500. I don't know, whether that was supposed to be PhD students and master students or senior fellows and junior fellows. But the expectation was that you would spend most of the year here at Blandy conducting your research. You had to provide 100 hours a year instructional time, which is very similar to what we expect of our modern students in their TA-ships. And they advertised that the fellowships were open to men and women with a bachelor's degree from a recognized college or university, and special preference to people with training in biology and agricultural subjects. And a little bit more later on this idea that they would accept women. And so the first Blandy Farmers were Thomas Whitaker, Samuel Hall and Lawrence Dickerson. And two of them are pictured here. I believe this is Lawrence Dickerson down here, and up there is, I believe, Samuel Hall. So two of the first Blandy farmers on the stone steps there. And, as Maral pointed out, if you didn't notice when you came in, we're rehabbing those stairs right now. And I brought this photo down to the masons that are working on the stairway. I showed it to them on Friday. I said, this is what the place looked like 100 years ago. It's pretty much exactly the same. Although White was hired as professor of agriculture, White's background is really genetics. So this is 1927. And you have to realize that in 1927, the field of genetics knew nothing about DNA. Certainly, they knew nothing about DNA's role in genetics. It wouldn't be established that DNA was the genetic material for several more decades. But at the time White became director, he knew, and the field knew, that chromosomes were important in heredity. And so White's research program here at Blandy Experimental Farm focused on plant chromosomes. And the idea was that by learning about chromosomes, we could help with plant breeding and establishing the relationships among different species of plants that might help in economic improvement. And so much of the early days of Blandy, the first few decades, focused on these chromosome studies. And this is a paper written by Thomas Whitaker, one of those three original Blandy farmers in 1928. And he is studying cultivated cucurbits. So this is the cucumber family. So cucumbers, gourds, melons, things like that. He's studying the differences in chromosomes across all these different species of cultivated cucurbits. And I love this line because it just seems like exactly a line that would come out of a thesis or even an undergraduate project here at Blandy today. That this guy spent years working on this project, and here in the second paragraph of his first paper is this: the material does not lend itself easily to this type of study, owing to the meager amount of chromatin material and correspondingly small and numerous chromosomes. So, he spent several years in grad school. It sounds like mostly frustrated. But here's what he was trying to do. So this is a later study published in 1944 from another graduate student at Blandy, Charles Ray. He's studying the genus Linum, which is the flax genus, which is another economically important plant genus. Each one of these drawings is the chromosome spread of a different species of Linum. And the students here at Blandy would create these microscope slides, these squashes, and they used a device called the camera lucida that would project the image in the microscope onto a sheet of paper and using either a pen and ink or a pencil, they would trace the image that the camera lucida would project, and then could develop size-corrected images of the chromosomes of all these different species. So over 15 students earned their master's degrees and PhDs here at Blandy by 1940. So it was one of the most successful graduate programs at the university. It was certainly the most prestigious graduate program in the Department of Biology at the time. And as Maral said, Georgette Blandy died in the late 1930s, and her inheritance from her husband transferred to the university and became an endowment for Blandy Experimental Farm. And so by 1940, with this successful program in place and with this influx of money, Orland White started to expand the program here. And one of the first things he did was in 1941 began to expand the quarters into the configuration that we know today, with the center and west wings of the quarter, including this library. He built a new research greenhouse where they grew plants that could not be grown outside here in Virginia. And he advertised to the country about the facilities here, the fellowships here, urging other researchers and especially students to come to the Blandy Experimental Farm to conduct research and earn their degrees, emphasizing the agrobiological focus, emphasizing the new dorms and modern laboratories that were built with that 1941 expansion. The arboretum, which White had been developing, I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes, and the faculty here. White is the geneticist, and Ladley Husted is the cytologist and the research fellows here. But other things were also happening in the 1940s. So World War II had a big effect on Blandy and the University of Virginia. In general, most of the college-age men were overseas. They were in Europe or they were in Asia fighting the war. And Blandy began to accept women into the PhD program here. When the fellowships were first advertised, all the way back in 1927, they were advertised as being open to women. But Blandy had never had a female graduate student until World War II broke out and the men disappeared. And Orland White admitted that he had vetoed every female application that ever came into Blandy. But during the war, he had no choice. It was accept women or have no program. And so during the war, he began accepting the first women graduate students into the program here at Blandy. These are a couple of the other faculty at Blandy at the time, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is Tom Baldwin.
I'm not sure. I thought maybe it was Don Britton. who had gotten accepted as a graduate student, was not married, but got married between his acceptance and arrival, much to White's chagrin.
Yes, White did not like his graduate students married. He thought that took their focus off of their research.
My parents had a 2-day honeymoon. And she went back home.
So, despite World War II, the program went on, and by the time the 1950s rolled around, over 30 students had gotten their PhDs and master's degrees here at Blandy. And I can't show you everyone, but I just picked a few whose photos I could get a hold of. I just want to point out a few of these folks. First of all, Margaret Young Menzel. She was one of those young women that were sitting in front of Orland White on the grass. She went on to a very distinguished career at Florida State after earning her PhD here at Blandy. In fact, the prize at the Botanical Society, the American Society of Botany, the annual prize for the best graduate student presentation in genetics is named here. Let's see. A couple other people I want to point out. So Thomas Whitaker, the poor grad student who was working on those cucurbids, frustrated by his project. He went on to work for the USDA and spent his entire career working on cucurbids. In fact, in this photograph, you can see he's got a gourd right in his hand. A couple other significant people, Thomas Baldwin and Walter Flory, father of Tom Flory here. Both of them returned to Blandy. Thomas Baldwin had a position at William and Mary, but he spent a number of summers here working with Orland White. And Walter Flory, after graduating from the University of Virginia with his PhD here at Blandy, went to Texas A&M and then Bridgewater College, and then returned as a professor at the University of Virginia, living in the Stone Cottage, the director's house, and served as the vice director of Blandy and as the first curator of the arboretum here. So he was at Blandy until the early 1960s. I got to meet very few of the scientists, the graduate students from this era. One of the two I got to meet was Walter Lewis, who made a couple appearances here at Blandy in the early 2000s. Walter Lewis was a very well-known and distinguished professor of ethnobotany at Washington University in St. Louis and at the Missouri Botanic Garden. He passed away just a few years ago, but his wife, Memo, was here just last year. So at 90-something, she just retired from WashU. And, she was a professor. Yeah. The only other Blandy farmer I ever met, I thought I'd single out here, is Max Stiff, who got his PhD here and met his wife, Ann, here at Blandy Experimental Farm. Ann was working as a technician during the summer. They met and were married and lived in this area for like 50 years or so. Mac, by the way, eventually served on the board of the foundation of the State Arboretum. Back then, he was known as Treasurer for Life. I mentioned the Arboretum in that letter. So Orland White had this research program using, looking at plant chromosomes. And in order to look at plant chromosomes, he needed live plants. And so he began to build a research collection here on the 700 acres of Blandy Experimental Farm. He had this idea from day one that this was a research facility, but it could be beautiful. I joke about this a lot when I give tours. I'm a very practical person, and if I were starting from scratch, building a research collection here at Blandy, it would have looked like an orchard with everything in rows and columns. So whatever the Excel equivalent was in 1927, I could have filled out the rows and columns of that and known exactly where every plant was. But White had a vision that his research collection could be beautiful. It was organized very scientifically. So in White's day, research collections were organized, research collections of plants were organized in what was called the angular parental system. And he organized his arboretum in the angular parental system. So the historic parts of the arboretum here are laid out by plant family. As you go around the arboretum, you go from what were considered the most primitive plant families back in the 1920s, and you eventually come to what were regarded as the most advanced plant families. But White had an eye for the landscape, I think, you know, it's probably no easier to see than from these two photos. So this is a photo I got from the Blandy collection from 1949. And this is a picture I took 50 years later in 1999, shortly after I got to Blandy, taken from basically the same spot. And what amazes me is, you know, you look at the conifer collection here, and it kind of looks like a Christmas tree farm, you know, with trees that are about, you know, 6 foot tall or so. And so White is going to retire in 6 years in 1949. So this is near the end of his career. Yet, you know, he could sort of see what the potential was here, what it eventually would be. And of course, that's our nice modern look of the conifer alley here at Blandy. So White retired in 1955, and he began, even before he retired, to work on, you know, what the succession plan would be. A committee was formed to look at the succession here at Blandy, pick a new director, and the committee eventually settled on Ralph Singleton. Singleton, like Orland White, had been trained at the Bussey Institute at Harvard University. Like White, he worked as a plant breeder, in this case at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. And before he was hired by UVA, he had moved on as curator of plant breeding at the Brookhaven lab. So Singleton had made his reputation in corn breeding, And here's a picture of Ralph Singleton in a cornfield. All these little envelopes here, those are the envelopes you put over corn tassels. So he was a classic corn breeder. But when he was at Brookhaven, his career took a very different direction. So in the 1950s, when Singleton was at Brookhaven, we're in the middle of the Cold War, and everyone is rightfully concerned about the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And Dwight Eisenhower gives a speech at the United Nations, popularly known as the Atoms for Peace speech, where he asks scientists around the world to begin thinking of peaceful uses for radiation. And he sees potential uses for radiation in medicine, but agriculture is another area that he recommends. And Ralph Singleton begins to develop a research program looking at using radiation in plant breeding. And so he devises this system for using a radioactive cobalt source to irradiate plants. They could alter them, create genetic mutations. They could then be incorporated into plant breeding programs. And so he built one of these radiation pits right here at Blandy Experimental Farm. It was located out in front of the property. As you come in, you see that sort of garage-like building that sits all by itself. We call that the genetics building because that was the staging area for the radiation pit. And so these are our colleagues of Ralph Singleton. They're standing right in the middle of the radiation pit. Underneath those blocks down underground is the actual cobalt source. You see all those rings that are chalked into the floor of the pit. Those are all at different distance increments away from the radiation source. So you can these are corn plants in those buckets, and you put the corn plants different distances so that they get different doses of radiation that would generate different numbers of mutations in the plant. And then eventually those plants would be screened for any beneficial mutations. Singleton also made other improvements on the property. This is what the university refers to as the Miller Lab. It's the little building and greenhouse on the opposite side of the road from the visitor parking lot. Singleton also brought in, he was really good about going to Army surplus depots and getting equipment for Blandy. And he brought in that road grader. This dump truck was still here when I got here. And we were still using that dump truck. But Singleton did not bring in many graduate students. Walter Flory left Blandy in the early 1960s, and by the time Singleton retired in 1965, the graduate program here was essentially dead. The Department of Biology, which had been running Blandy all this time, saw the future of biology as cell and molecular biology. They didn't see much use for this field station 90 miles away in Clarke County. And so after Singleton's retirement, the university pulled academic programs out of Blandy. Up until 1982, Blandy went into a period of I won't quiescence probably isn't the best word, but for lack of a better one, quiescence. There were a couple of different sort of acting directors at Blandy during the period. The most notable was Tom Ewart, who started a program at Blandy that lasted until the present time. He started holiday workshops here at Blandy. Lord Fairfax Community College, now Laurel Ridge, was invited to start agricultural programs here, and so they had, Laurel Ridge had, or Lord Fairfax had cattle and sheep at Blandy, and students who would live here, and education programs in animal husbandry here. And then there were lots of weddings back in the 1970s. But in 1982, there became renewed interest in Blandy as a field station. And the driving force behind that interest was Ed Connor, who was a young professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences. He studied plant-insect interactions, especially insects in oak trees. He saw Blandy as a perfect place for him and his students to do research. And he and other members of the department wrote a proposal to the university to get Blandy transferred to the Department of Environmental Sciences and to begin running Blandy as an environmental science field station. Ed was successful with that proposal. He began to hire faculty. So his first hire was Michael Bowers, who served as research coordinator until 1997. Michael eventually became the next director of Blandy. So after Ed, Michael was director from 1997 to 2005. And Ed's second hire was Chris Sackey, who was hired to be the curator of the arboretum. And the three of them began offering classes again at Blandy and bringing students back to do research. And this ushers in what I consider sort of the modern era here at Blandy. And just some parallels to today. So Michael Bowers then wrote an article to send out, so this was in the Ecological Bulletin, telling everybody about the Blandy Experimental Farm and what it has to offer researchers, trying to get more people coming out here. The agricultural program that Lord Fairfax was running was scaled down, and eventually it left Blandy. And Michael, Ed, and Chris expanded the footprint of the research program at Blandy, and probably most notably, Michael Bowers was a landscape ecologist, and so he began using what we call the succession fields nowadays, but this big field out along Route 50 for his landscape ecology studies. Since then, we've been improving the research infrastructure here. We built a new lab in 2012, so we finally moved out of that lower floor of the quarters over on the east wing. We replaced that 1941 greenhouse in 2017 with a new modern greenhouse, and we've been bringing students in ever since. We still use the quarters for housing, so our undergraduates are still housed in the dorm rooms on the second floor of the quarters. The director's house is now used for graduate housing, as is the old farmhouse where farmhands that worked the land here lived for years. And we built new housing, little cottages for visiting faculty. And our research program has now grown to over 30 students and faculty each summer. Every now and then, just like Max Stiff, one of them finds the girl of his dreams, and so weddings still happen. Another interesting thing that happened with the rediscovery by the university of Blandy's potential is the galvanization of the local public around Blandy, and the desire to make it not just a university resource, but a public resource. And so the Friends of Blandy were formed in 1984. Orm Wilson, who owned the Tuileries at the time, served as president of the Friends of Blandy, who eventually convinced the General Assembly to name the Orland White Arboretum the State Arboretum of Virginia. So we've served as the State Arboretum ever since. And in becoming the State Arboretum, we've really embraced a very strong public mission along with our traditional academic mission. And so Christine Flanagan, who was the wife of Michael Bowers, was hired as the first assistant curator for outreach. And so she began the school programs and other public programs. And of course, the Friends of Blandy grew into the foundation of the State Arboretum, and they have been working to improve the facilities here, especially facilities that affect the visitor experience here. And most significantly, the foundation has gotten the state to realize that they have a responsibility for the State Arboretum too, and they've brought state support in that's allowed our staff to grow, allow for better care for the collection, and a much more ambitious outreach program here. So I'll leave it there with this photo. So this is Orland White, and allegedly his favorite tree in the Arboretum was that Arizona cypress. Also allegedly his cremated remains were put under that Arizona cypress. But I don't know, it's kind of a reminder that it's something that maybe doesn't belong here, but with a little care and determination, it can persist, grow, and service to them. So thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Dave. Not so fast. We've got some water coming up here for you, but what I'd like to do, we've got a couple minutes, is invite Dave and Maral. If you could join us in these fancy chairs over here, and maybe we'll take a couple questions from the audience. Thanks for being the first, Mary.
I have a question for Maral. Do we know anything about the people who lived here from the end of the Civil War until Blandy purchased the property, or until it became part of the University of Virginia?
Well, it was the relatives of, Mary Tooley was still here for a while, and then her business agent lived in the house, because in one of the advertisements it talks about that. Certainly the enslaved were still here, even though she rented them, many of them out, as is evidenced in newspaper advertisements for their leasing that were held in Millwood in front of Locke's store. But it was, I think that it was pretty much shuttered, you know, the main part of the house. A lot of there's a story about, you know, why was there no damage done to the house, and there's a tale about a servant had been there, and when the troops moved through, there's a transom window with an eagle on it that they showed to, and apparently the Union troops said, we won't burn it because you're a Union sympathizer. I don't think that was the case, but the thing is that Mary had, she complained to relatives in letters about how they had lost so much of their crops, that the troops burned their crops, as was done, you know, in a lot of the area. And, you know, everyone hears about the burning in the valley, and there was some burning of homes, targeted homes in northern Clarke County, but in this area there was not a real battle. I mean, there was troop movement through here along the roads, but I don't think that there were, you know, any serious battles here, nor do I think it was used as there's no evidence to suggest it was used as a hospital, which, so I don't know if that really answers your
But do we know if anyone, or what was happening in the old part of quarters during the late 1800s? Is there any evidence of how it was used? Or
I haven't found any evidence. You know, I think maybe in the, you know, after the Civil War, I'm just sort of applying this logic here based on other experiences that I've had with historic properties where former slave quarters would then be used for tenant farmers. For example, at Claremont with that log building, that was, there were 2 families that lived there. They partitioned them, turned them into 4 families, and then after the Civil War, they hired people to farm the land, and part of their pay was room and board. So I don't know if that was done here or not. It was such a legal mess until, you know, the Boyces got hold of it that I don't think there was any clear sense of someone being in complete control and saying, you know, this is what we should do. So, thank you.
Dave, where is this tree located on the property?
Straight out from here. So there's several Arizona cypress that are right at the edge of these Norway spruce that you drive through on your way to the parking lot here. I don't know which of those trees is that tree specifically, but it's somewhere right up against the Norway spruce here.
But that wouldn't be something he had planted, would it be?
Oh yeah.
Oh, and it grew?
Wow.
They like it here.
David, who paid for the tree planting and the specimens that were put in here?
Orland White, as director, set the Blandy budget, and he budgeted $1,000 a year for the arboretum. That was it. And so most of that went to materials for growing the plants, and most of the plant material he got by exchange from other botanic gardens and other collections. So mostly he was getting people to, you know, either donate seed or trade seed with him to build the arboretum.
And was there a landscape architect that was helping him?
As far as I know, no. So it was, yeah, it was sort of his idea.
The records of what came from there. He was quite a record keeper.
Oh yeah, so there we have accession books, handwritten accession books that date back to the very first specimen that was accessioned into the arboretum.
Yeah, is the cobalt still there, and what's its half-life?
Dying to know.
So the cobalt source is gone. It was supplied by the Department of Energy, and they removed the cobalt source in about like 1968. When the Tuileries was purchased a couple of years ago, the person who purchased it, when he found out that there had been these experiments here in the 1950s and early 60s, he was really worried about it. He contacted me, and I did just sort of a back of the envelope calculation on what would be left. And the half-life of cobalt is very short, and there would, nowadays, there would be essentially nothing left. Even if they had left it in place, there would be virtually no radiation left.
And stay tuned, because we have another program on that topic.
In the arboretum and in your research, are you emphasizing native plants?
Yeah, so that was a huge change in the 1980s, when sort of the new era of Blandy. So when Orland White was director, he was bringing plants in from all over so there are a lot of Asian plants. He had he loved these Arizona cypress. He had a real thing apparently for plants from the southwestern U.S. So he brought in lots of plants from the Southwest. But in the 1980s, the curation policy was changed to emphasize native plants, and we are still trying to maintain the historic collections here as best we can, propagating many times from the existing collection here. But in the 1980s, once we were designated the State Arboretum of Virginia, most of the collection's development has been toward native plants, and the native plant trail, the three different sections of it, were all developed since the 1980s.
That's great to hear.
So were the original collections just trees, or was it broader than that?
So it was broader than that. He claimed at one point, I think it's 5,000 species in over 9,000 exceptions. And I think the only way you could get to 5,000 would be to include a lot of herbaceous stuff. So my guess is that he had big collections of herbaceous material here as well.
Does that explain the prickly pear out on the...
Probably.
When was the amphitheater built, and was it constructed with a specific purpose in mind?
So the amphitheater was built in the 1990s. The Boxwood Garden, so the American Boxwood Society sort of moved to Blandy in the late 1950s, early 1960s. Walter Flory was a big part of getting the Boxwood Society here. And where the amphitheater is now was part of the Boxwood collection. And when funds were donated to the Friends of Blandy in the early 1990s to build that amphitheater, the Boxwood collection was moved, and the amphitheater was created. We had concerts there pretty regularly through the 1990s and early 2000s. The students would sort of serve as sort of crowd control for the concerts, and the foundation would sell tickets. But it became a money-losing sort of venture, and those concerts were faded out in the early 20-teens. And so since then, the amphitheater is really, frankly, underutilized.
Our UVA